Hey, folks, welcome back to the Pulse. My name is Matt. This is Crypto Heartbeat, and we're back to the basics. My favorite thing to do, and that's to meet new folks, introduce them to you, but also, just to learn about what makes people tick. We've got the the alternative, the Welsh alternative to Nicolas Cage. We've got Ben Kayge, and this is Uncaged today. This is gonna be pretty cool. You've been following him probably for the last year, and boy, as I've watched his content and his background, his experience, he brings a unique voice to this whole ecosystem. And it's great to learn from people, right? That's what I love about this. You get to meet people, you get to be a part of a community, but you also get to glean things and learn things. And my hopes on this channel is that you get to know people in a different way. So often people in the community are bringing value just every day. It's like, I know that Ben is thinking about, hey, how can I bring value? What is it that I can add to this? Do I have a unique perspective? He's thinking about what's the content I'm going to make. And these are givers, man, people who are thinking about ways in which they can bring value to you. And it's rare, I think, they get a chance to you to understand their background, right? They want to bring you value. They don't want to just talk about themselves. So I want to give an opportunity to talk about himself, right? To learn more about who he is, what makes him tick. And that's why you come here to Crypto Heartbeat, right? I think so. Sam Kemp does. Let's go. Jay Bond, what's up? Magnus, David Lee, all the way from Southwestern Indiana. Talk about a guy who knows how to care for people. This is the guy that came to my dad's funeral, right? Traveled 7.5 hours from Southwestern Indiana. He's the guy. Man, so great. Taryn, what's going on? Hornet UK1, what is going on? Wanted to thank you, Matthew, for reigniting my faith. Wow, that's huge, man. That's a compliment. Thank you. That's a journey that we're all on, right? Why are we here? Those are some of the big questions in life. Sam Kemp, good to see you. Blue Collar Grunt, Extravagant Taste. Pineapple Love, Hexonium, good to see you. Ease and Chill, you made it. Thanks for being here. We have Garth Wilders. There's a lot of crazy things happening in this world. And of course, Argentina and the Netherlands are leading the way, right? People are pushing back. They've had enough of this stuff, right? Folks, without further ado, let's bring in the guy. You thought it was you thought we were going to be unhinged, but today we're going to be uncaged. Ben Kayge, what's going on, man? Good to see you. Welcome to Crypto Heartbeat.
Thank you. We can be a little unhinged too.
Let's do it, man. Let's do it. Well, it is so great to have you on here. I've been watching from afar. I haven't been in the chat much or in the comments, but I've been paying attention, and you're a special guy with a special perspective. And so I'm really excited to kind of get to know you better. So welcome.
Thank you. No, very kind of you to say. And yeah, likewise, I've been watching you as well. And so this has probably been a long time coming. So it's good to be here. And
yeah,
I'm excited
awesome
to chat and bring some fresh perspective, I think.
Yeah, like absolutely. And you definitely do. And I wanted to really ask you about this because to me, this is what I see in you. I watch your content. I'm like, hey, here's a guy who's been kind of VC business guy, been in financial world, OG when it comes to crypto. And you're coming and you're saying, hey, I'm going to give some of this back to people. That's at least what I see. Have I caught you right? Is that how you'd characterize yourself?
Yeah, and it's because I'm very much still in much of that world that I haven't quite been able to be as consistent on here as I'd like to. But yeah, to be honest with you, I think that my take, everyone has their own individual lens, but I think now that we're in a bit of a crucial time, looking at kind of all things macro, where we're at somewhat of more of an intersection between TradFi and crypto than we ever have been. There's a lot for people to learn. Not to say that I'm the be all end all of knowledge here, but I do think that we run the risk of focusing in on a lot of the crypto only lenses that don't necessarily shed light in some of the other areas that are just as important. So that's kind of where I saw a bit of a niche in terms of what was needed, really, to help kind of educate people, for lack of a better word. So yeah, I think you hit that pretty much on the head.
Okay. And so tell me about your background. Tell me about what is it that you bring to the table, because it sounds like quite an experience when it comes to investing in business and VC type of stuff. Tell us about that. What is that? Where's that come from?
Well, I mean, I'd like to tell you one of those stories where it was since I was a 12-year-old. It wasn't, I went to law school.
Okay.
I thought I was going to be a lawyer for the longest time, but ended up, after graduating, not wanting to go down that path. I'm sure many who have gone down that path kind of feel the same. And so I got kind of edged into finance. I started my financial tenure, let's say, at BlackRock, of all places. Um, way early days, so I wasn't rubbing shoulders with anyone important there by any means. It was pretty much the young stable of folks who are just getting started doing all what we call our FSA regulations, or the Series 7 and all of those qualifications. And pretty much the minute I got um, those things under my belt, I shifted to Goldman's. I was lucky enough to get into Goldman Sachs on the trading floor and spent a couple of years there. And to cut a long story short, I ended up moving to the States as part of a VC play. Kind of got headhunted, I guess, by a VC group that were very much entrenched in that technology space. A lot of the time when, and people may have heard me say this before in previous kind of videos of my own, but when software as a service first became, it was kind of the first stage of what Web3 and Web4 is currently. And so we were focused on looking, buying, and adapting to companies within that software as a service space. And so it was interesting, and it caught my eye because it was again, a pretty important intersection between finance and business, finance and tech. So I spent quite a few years in the Bay Area with ended up being two different VC groups there, and learned a lot. Learned a lot about what it takes to identify a successful budding company, what to look for, from the the founders to the team to the setup, help them really branch that network and expand their footprint, as efficiently as we could. And obviously, where to invest, when there's skin in the game, all of that stuff becomes a lot more important. And I liked the pressure. I liked, and that sounds like a bit of a cliched thing to say, but I liked feet being held to fire. By not just us, but the folks we were investing in, and seeing how different people react to different pressured situations. And it was a great school to learn in. And so after that, I do what I'm doing now, which is for my 9 to 5, let's say. I do, I own a public relations firm. A lot of that is centered still in and around tech. So a lot of the VC firms that, I are in my network, I'm still engaging with them. And it's been very interesting to see the shift of where those focuses have been, from tangible products into more of this digital realm where it is about crypto. It is about, the evolution of Web3 and how that's interacting with AI. It's a lot of really exciting stuff that's as much of a passion play for us as much as anything. But that's been super interesting. And I guess, I am an entrepreneur by nature, I guess. And again, another very cliche thing to say, but I think that's all the more important when you're looking for ways to put your money to work. And I think part of my journey that I've really enjoyed so far has been in, real estate, has been, I own some restaurants and some bars, and really just trying to get into as many different driven avenues as I could to I guess take the pressure off myself financially, but also make sure that I'm understanding how best to stay ahead of inflation, how best to protect myself in situations that we could be veering into now in terms of banking control and all of that good stuff. So I know I threw a lot out there. I'll take a
No,
breath.
that's fantastic. No, it's fantastic. So one of the things I'm always curious about, I watch your content and I see that you're not just exclusively Richard Hart fanboy, but when I see BlackRock, Goldman Sachs, at least that financial experience that I would consider to be very traditional, is that you've recognized something in this ecosystem. You've recognized something here that you consider valuable. And to me, that's a really good sign when it comes to what are the leading indicators. Is this ecosystem, is this message of freedom and sovereignty and these things, is this resonating with smart people? I consider you to be a smart person. What is it about this ecosystem that attracts you?
There's quite a number of things, and a number of different ways to answer this. And I'll, thank you for saying I'm smart. What I will say is that I also listen to where the wind is blowing from a lot of much smarter people. And I guess one of the luxuries, let's say, of putting in the sweat equity up front with even, in some of my beginnings of my journey, with some of these VC groups and some of these, TradFi guys who are still in those arenas, you get good indicators of what's going on behind the scenes. And part of the reason that I had started this channel And I was into the ecosystem a little before that. But part of the reason I started my channel was because, it was becoming more apparent that it's not just me. It's a lot of traditional finance guys. Kind of at the beginning of 2022, started talking a lot more about, what their concrete path forward was, certainly in terms of adoption, which was a big deal because we'd never heard that before. We'd known it was coming on the horizon, but we had never heard it coming from the mouths of those TradFi people. And of course, they were probably buying on the back end, but, in secret. But for me, analyzing the ecosystem at the time, it was just Hex, and I think Pulse Chain was kind of on the horizon. And much the same way as I would look to analyze something on the VC front, you ultimately are trying to look at what that network effect is going to be, and when you have a passionate community driving a lot of that forward, that takes a lot of the pain points away from generating that network event effect. And so, Richard Hart being quite a polarizing person, and it took me a while to actually accept his personality and essentially his midlife crisis and his terrible dress sense. But looking through that and seeing that he was actually speaking a lot of sense. And so, looking a little further ahead, and I'm being completely transparent here in terms of kind of my initial draw, looking at the control measures that have been inevitable for a while, not just CBDC talk, but,
Yeah.
Even now we've just had a document signed by, the Fed, and it just came out. I forget the name of it, but it's in control. It's granting banks, hundreds of banks in the US alone, control over our assets, able to freeze our accounts on a dime and all of that stuff that comes along with it. And so that narrative of decentralization is going to become stronger and stronger. And when you have an ecosystem with a founder and a community that's been shouting from the rooftops how important decentralization is, it's very tough not to pay attention. And it's a little, in my opinion, maybe a little before its time. Not that
Mhm.
decentralization isn't, a narrative that's very important and more people are becoming aware of it. But, it has been, that control, that, not your keys, not your coins type mentality has been a little premature. And so I always thought this would be a longer term play, providing we had the community to ensure that it stayed around and a founder to do so as well. And so I don't think we've been proven wrong yet. I think that the community itself is a very passionate one. Do we get a lot of people prematurely hyping the masses? Yeah, we do. And, I think in situations like that, it's not the wisest of moves, but it does show passion. It does show that we're waving the ecosystem's flag. And I think that's going to be all the more important a little further down the road when we have essentially a lot of traditional finance folks too, not just looking to leverage crypto professionally as they do, because that's going to be simply getting involved into the blue chips of the world and seeing that kind of matriculate through the system. But I think that they're going to be forced. General retailer investors, general people, people who are going to be late on the pickup, but suddenly realize that their money's being controlled in certain ways, will be forced down to down a decentralized avenue. And I think that if we can position ourselves to capture a lot of that, then it's going to mean some very, very big things for the ecosystem. So,
Yeah.
a bit of a long-winded answer, but that's kind of what went into my decision there, to
Well,
kind of get involved in.
yeah, it's well, and frankly, that's why I want to have you on the channel, right? It's you're a sensible voice. You're looking at this from a practical perspective, and that's what I've that the reason I started this a couple years ago was because I didn't hear a voice like my own in this, right? I wanted to talk about these things in a sensible way, and so okay, we've got a number of factors kind of potentially playing against us, right? We understand this fundamental thing, which I think what I love about Richard Hart defending the core tenets of decentralization and it really being a pure play. And then we've got this kind of sandwiched in between it, this weird kind of event, which is the crazy, outrage marketing Richard. And now we've got the SEC. And now we've got, of course, related to all the IPFS control type of things and the things that we and also the difficulty I think of regular, newcomers getting into the pulse chain. Um, you know, what is your kind of take on I've always felt like there's kind of be like the second coming, right? Literally the second coming of Richard Hart, right? Like there's going to be a moment when he's back. And, he's probably going to dance on people's graves, right? If he wins or even if he settles. If it's over, we'll see him back. You mentioned in one of your videos one of the challenges of this because, you know, I think leadership matters tremendously, especially in business. And even though this is a decentralized world, still adoption is driven by leadership. And there's a bit of a vacuum right now. What's the impact of that, in your opinion?
Honestly, and many people are not going to like the answer here, but it's a huge factor, and I think it's detrimental. Um, Not that I would imagine him being able to change this had he been more active during the bear cycle, or I think we're still in a bear cycle, to be quite honest with you, or at least my definition of what a bull cycle is, we haven't yet reached. It would have been wasted energy should he have been in front of our faces that whole time. I think we would have diluted the message and all of that good stuff. So I don't really side with anyone who's been saying that he stepped away for so long and it's not great. I'm happy he stepped away for that time, because when he does come back, it's going to inject a lot more enthusiasm. At present, though, and I don't know if I have a better answer than currently what's going on, but it is detrimental. I mean, and I can't help but look at things through somewhat of a startup mentality. And as I said in a previous video of mine, Pulse Chain's very much out of the gates fresh. It's a startup, and it's never successful when a CEO steps away so early on, because it gives off an impression of abandonment, and it also and right now, at times when we need those little pieces of positive sentiment, that makes all the more of an impact. We know the crypto prices in general, stock prices in general, are driven by sentiment. Yeah, we want to make sure that the fundamentals are in place and you're vetting things the right way and all of that good stuff. But ultimately, sentiment, certainly short term, is what drives up price. And I think that Richard being away is giving out a negative sentiment, especially to those who are not quite as patient. And we've seen it now. And it's very easy to say, be patient. I know a lot of people who are tapped out because they got involved in the SAC pricing and then still haven't really been able to see any of those returns come to fruition. And it sucks. And there's no getting around it. So I get that right now you may not be in the best mood, but there's a bit of a snowball effect when people are feeling down and they're venting out loud, especially on platforms like Twitter. My best advice is don't even look at Twitter if you feel like you've got a fickle mentality and you're easily swayed, which is probably most people. But I think that that's an easy thing to latch onto as well, that he's been away and he's running, and it also doesn't help that we've had some of those front end changes to the website that seem to distance things a little bit more, because it doesn't matter how much you look at it and how much you justify it. It's another roadblock to onboarding. It's another showing of, potential abandonment. And I don't think he's abandoning things. No. But those are all things that go into the short-term price performance. And right now, people seem to be looking for that kind of affirmation that we're still fighting a good fight, and these price drops will be temporary. And you can only say so much that, to be patient, and you wouldn't go zoom out a little bit and realize that, most things that, just because we're seeing Bitcoin pump right now a little bit, and it is a little bit, it's considerable in terms of, going from essentially 15 grand to 44. Hey, it's great to see. But in terms of where this bull market is going, you can't just work backwards off the last bull cycle. There's much higher highs. An alt season is a little ways off yet, and so it's not a time to panic. I do personally think that, and again, from what I'm hearing, and I don't want to make out that I've got some secret source here, or I'm like talking to anyone who's at any way, shape, or form a part of that SEC process, but the general sentiment is that it's a bit of a fool's errand. And so I do imagine Richard Hart coming back on his white horse, beating his chest, like you said, and just, and teabagging everyone. I think that's the sentiment I made. And that's gonna cause some legitimacy. And I know a lot of people, even in my own comments in some of the videos, it's been, it's too late for that. If he comes back, we're still gonna face the old issue where people thought he was a scam artist. I don't know. I think that coming back, having beat an SEC situation, adds a certain level of legitimacy to anyone. And so coming back on any kind of positive note, I think it's going to break down a lot of those barriers to entry, a lot of those, those issues that hex that out of the gates, knowing that Pulse is a different animal. And so this ecosystem turns into a different animal too.
Sure. I think the prevailing wind is in our direction when it comes to the macro of decentralization being important. However, let me ask you some advice. So I'm put on your kind of traditional financial hat in some respects, but also what you know about what advice would you give to builders in our community of the things that are missing from the pulse chain ecosystem that if we had them would make things right? We defined and we agree that Richard's leadership is important, but let's put that aside. Let's say what needs to be there in order for onboarding to be simple, for the what's missing and what needs to be built in your mind to say, hey, we've made this so easy. You can come in and this is the place, the water's warm, join us, and we see that network effect, and maybe Richard does come back and we have that leadership. What's missing right now?
Firstly, without a shadow of a doubt, for some of that traditional money to directly enter the market, or our section of the market, partnerships with legitimate companies, which isn't an easy thing to corral because, of course, we have an underlying layer one that hasn't yet kind of been tested in the eyes of probably many, certainly, folks who are used to only now, feeling comfortable enough to get involved in Ethereum, for instance. So it's not an easy thing, but I do think as soon as an entity is formed or a platform or a project is formed that seemingly has some of those more trusted and legitimate partnerships take place to whatever format. I mean, this doesn't have to be the genius solution to all solutions. It just needs
Right.
to add legitimacy to your project in a way that is giving off serious vibes, right? I mean, that sounds ridiculous, but that's one of the main things that we're currently missing, and understandably so, because we're so new. I think
Yep.
that when you look at some of the other layer one chains that have had a lot of that success, it's been because they were not just solving the issue and then shouting that they're solving it. They're putting that solution into motion with, essentially what are much more analytic or vetting oriented entities, and that's companies, that's banks, that's financial houses, that's you name it. It can literally be anything. So I would say that, and it sounds obvious, but I think that's going to be probably one of the main catalysts to adding a lot of that gravitas and trust factor to some of these new folks coming in. Secondly, we need to make it a lot easier to onboard in the first place. I mean,
Yep.
I know this is a recent development. We've just talked about it, but take away as many roadblocks as you can for buying, purchasing. I do think, once we get past SEC type shenanigans, exchange listings may open up. I think that, those barriers to entry may be somewhat lowered. And so I think that in itself will add some legitimacy, even though it's almost ironic. You want to be on a
Yeah.
Coinbase, yet we're preaching about decentralization. Fine. You can hold your assets how you want. Getting access to those assets is probably key for most people. And as we start seeing a lot of those sanctions and some of those regulations come into play, linking your bank to certain exchanges is going to be tough. And
Yeah.
so, unless you're starting with crypto, which a lot of new folks, most new folks won't be, then that's going to have to be a very viable entry point. And so, the sooner we can make that happen, the better. Um, to get a little bit more granular in terms of specific platforms or ideas or notions, it's tough because I think we have so many unique selling points that all revolve around control and decentralization, which is almost the antithesis of what a lot of these TradFi brands tend to look for. When you're
Yep.
looking, or if you're a financial institution, you're looking to firstly get the sign off internally. And I think a lot of these folks, don't get me wrong, are putting a lot of these TradFi investment houses on a pedestals a lot of the time. Take it from someone who's been there. Unless you're, in charge of a giant hedge fund, which some of these people are, the majority of that additional money coming in is going to be from investors that are part of a pod system where you perhaps have one analyst that is linked to 3, 4 traders.
Yeah.
And so it's a very replicable process that you can do yourself. You just need an
Yeah.
IQ to be able to read things, and then the ability to make decisions based on much of the same info. And in crypto, that's notoriously being behind. So we do run the risk of not yet being vetted in the right ways for them.
Yeah.
Anyone from a professional capacity having pulse chain ecosystem be a viable option based on internal processes and practices. What
Okay.
they do personally, I think which is why I say, right now, that's not our key demographic. Yeah, we can spin that plate as well, and hopefully we start making advancements in those areas so that we are viable going forward. But I think for this bull cycle, most of us care about getting a big return on being, first in, let's say. I think that our target demographic has to be the retail investor, because they're
Right.
not going to be limited by internal processes. They can make a decision, and the best thing we can do is leverage this narrative, this unfortunate narrative of you know CBDCs being the next stage of this, but bank control. And I think that
Yeah.
we are facing a huge period of time where deflation is going to all-time highs, right? We have more inflation happening. Of it, we know what's caused it, after the pandemic and all of that stuff initially, but we also have huge debt
Yeah.
and war brewing, right? Which all sounds conspiracy theory-esque, but it's not, and it is happening,
Yeah.
and people are planning for this. Take it from me, that's
Yeah.
that's as much of a driving factor to what banks are looking to do with their money right now as they can. And so it's a bit of a silver lining in that, or I should say, a double-edged sword, where we're looking at a situation on the macro level where we have all of these things that could potentially mean a devaluation of our fiat currencies, dollars being chief among them, being removed from the global reserve currency, being shunned by all the BRICS countries, being banks looking to switch to CBDCs. It's a ticking clock until the dollar fades, and so you want to make sure first and foremost that we're not keeping our money in dollars if we can. Where are the avenues, knowing that
Yeah.
gold is not what it used to be? It is, I guess it is in some respects, but now we have this magical thing called crypto that, there's a reason why these huge banks are getting in, right? And they're
Yeah.
getting in big, because this ETF is just one of the catalysts that, it's been in the works for a while, but it will break down the doors. And so there's a narrative going on that people need to protect themselves, the country needs to protect itself, and we don't want to be in a situation where our hard-earned dollars, like we've seen happen in countries that we probably would have anticipated happening a lot more so than we would in the US. But that's how that's how it shocks you. That's how it gets you. And
Yeah.
so as we start feeding that narrative of decentralization and control, we need to make it a go-to option for those retail investors, people wanting to
Yeah.
protect their money. We'll
Yeah.
get, a lot of that catchment zone is going to be professional traders or high net worth individuals, but on a professional sense, it's going to be a lot harder of a demographic to attract until we start giving up gravitas flags, right? And that's going to
Yeah.
come through a lot of more hard work and inroads by many people. But right now, that's the appeal we need to make. And
Yeah.
so maybe even a platform coming out and I don't know how they do it, but essentially being I don't know. I mean, yeah, I was
Yeah.
going to go on another tangent
Yeah,
there.
yeah, no. Well, let me so one of the promises, since the very beginning, the reason I even started to channel was because Richard was forking Ethereum, right? That was the main narrative that I was like, I'm not missing this one. One of the things that differentiated and does differentiate the Pulse chain is the fact that there were copies. And we know that it hasn't been around long enough for people to recognize and support their copy, right? So there are some I mean, if you think about it, everything was copied over. What do you think the impact would be if some well-known brands, if you will, in crypto supported their Pulse chain copy? What kind of impact do you think that would have as far as legitimizing things and attracting people?
Huge. Yeah. And you're right. I mean, the more you feed that legitimacy machine in any way, I mean, it's going to be huge. And I think that, especially with a young ecosystem like this, um, it wouldn't be tough to get that ball rolling should we see, someone or an entity or, whatever it is, start preaching that message. So, yes, the only issue is I don't see that happening anytime soon, to be honest with
Yeah.
you, until we get it's almost like a catch 22, because we need to see the Pulse chain ecosystem reach a certain point where it is indeed something that a company or an entity or personality feels comfortable talking about that isn't already entrenched in
Right.
the community. And so, yeah, I think it would be huge. I just don't
Yeah.
think we're there yet, and we're not likely going to be there during this cycle. And for me, I'm a big proponent of playing, and this sounds maybe the opposite of many, but you can only plan ahead so much. Playing things by ear is often kind of the best way to do this. And by that, I mean staying relevant and assessing the sentiment and assessing the macro and micro market conditions, which goes into most, investment decisions. But I think that, for this cycle, we kind of have to see what's realistic and not live on some of those, ambitious, bull flags that may not come to fruition. I think we have a tendency, or a lot of people have a tendency, to talk about these ideal situations in which the ecosystem would pump, and it often has a detrimental effect because ultimately we don't get there, right? And we've seen
Yeah.
people,
Yeah.
certain influencers out there predicting all-time highs in November or
Yeah.
December, and it's like, I mean, it might be good for clicks right out of the gates, but don't have people believe that, because
Yeah.
that's not what we're in this for. Yes, we want to make money, but we've also got to make sure that our timeline and the realistic kind of catalyst to price performance are there, and we're utilizing the right ones, and we don't need to make kind of these overly ambitious estimations. And don't get this wrong, a lot of people may think that I'm being derogatory of the ecosystem, or I have less faith in it. I really don't. I think that there is a lot of potential there for sure that will come to fruition in a way that will please us. I
Yeah.
just think that we have to be a little bit more accurate in what we're highlighting as those catalysts.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, and I've heard, even influencers in the space talking about, the maybe not so much now, but when I started my channel, a lot were talking about how it doesn't really matter, that a lot of the tradfi coming in and how it wasn't going to happen. We've heard it all before, and it's just a failing to read them through a macro lens. And you really, it's dangerous, because these are the biggest catalysts that are taking place right now. And in my
Yeah.
opinion, why we're going to see such a monumental, bull market. And when I say monumental, I mean that a lot of the diminishing returns that some folks are predicting, I think at the very least, it's not going to come into effect as much as you would imagine. I think when you have
Yeah.
trillions of dollars entering the market, we have a bull cycle being fed like it's never been fed before, in a sweet spot of time where we also don't have the regulations that usually accompany that type of action.
Yeah.
And so this really is the time to make money. And you're a fool if you think that the pulse chain ecosystem isn't going to get a huge portion of that, because any portion is huge when you have that much money entering the market.
Well, that's interesting you say that. Barry Crump here says, while we're having this unresolved SEC case hanging over us, onboarding is next to impossible. And I understand what people's sentiment there is. Those are real things. The curiosity that I have is, I've done a lot of kind of examination of who Richard is, personally, and what I think drives him. And, when he talks about the glory and those type of things, he always seems to be one step ahead. And of course, there has to be these key catalytic events, obviously brands or, copies being supported. I do think not having a, recognized stable coin is an issue. Obviously on ramps, those are issues there, and the SEC thing hanging over our head. But I'm really curious about this one factor. We've got a cycle, right? This cycle has a window of time. We all know it, and no one wants to miss it, right? I recognize that, when I do the analysis of what made Hex do so well, it was a combination of factors. But one of the factors was Richard and resources and people that believed in Richard at the time, right? The price was protected. And so I've learned a lot of things, but one thing I do, recognize is that the floor was lava many times and Hex was up, and there was a reason for it. So there's a component of this, which is what you could call market manipulation, but at least protecting the price, and obviously you could do that on Ethereum, but secondarily, there are I feel like some missing components that, okay, let's say settled with the SEC or win would probably be the biggest one. And then of course, some of the, foundation, ecosystem infrastructure things that have to be there to make it work well, right? Being able to get money in easily. Not to say that the bridge is that hard, but it is. Obviously we've got things like Uniswap, shadow banning. There's a lot of things there. Is there a chance that we miss this cycle, in your opinion, Ben?
I mean, there's always a chance, right? Not to be a
Yep.
doomsdayer, but I mean, you just listed quite a few things that are on paper easy remedies, but we don't yet have. And I think you hinted at something just now in terms of Hex's success. When the floor was lava, we had a shepherd who was
Yes.
very active, and he's not now.
Yeah.
And it's very easy to jump to the conclusion that, oh, well, there's a lot of money that's gone his way. Is he motivated? Right? I mean, that's
Yeah.
that's
Well, there's
essentially what it
600
is.
there's $600 million worth of die sitting out there, right? And of course, that's right now frozen just because of the nature of the SEC case. Do you think we'll ever see that as liquidity into the Pulse Chain ecosystem, or do you think that stays out?
I doubt it. I doubt it. I mean,
Do you?
look, it's also a carrot too. I mean, look,
Yeah.
if as much as it is a subjective one, I think that when we have such a big amount of potential liquidity just sat there, then it's almost given the perception of value being abstained, and so never being able to push the price down. We're so good in this ecosystem of justifying things in a positive light despite
Oh,
common
absolutely.
sense.
Absolutely.
So I guess to answer your question, yeah, I mean, I do see the possibility of missing it, but I think it's unlikely. And
Yeah.
I think that, it's very easy to get all doomsday when we're in a situation like this. And it's almost an entire repeat of every single, fundamentally sound project or token shaking out people before. I mean, I know it's an obvious thing to say, but this is nothing new. We've these same concerns and worries add in the SEC. I guess they've become a lot more active this cycle than they previously have been, but there's always reasons to abandon ship. There's always reasons to doomsday, and there's always a echo chamber of negativity and venting that goes on. This isn't a new thing. So I get the mentality of some out there perhaps being sucked into that way of thinking, but I also think that it's probably unlikely. And I do
Okay.
think I will say I think a lot of the success, or I should say how high that bar of success is going to depend on the activity of our founder, because he is a founder. And as much as there's been from day one that mantra of not your coins, like, I get it. Not your coins. That expect no work or nothing back from the work of others, whatever
Expectations. Yeah.
expectations. And that's a pre-defensive measure, right? We get the reason behind it, and whether some people take that and run with it in a million and one different directions is up to them, but ultimately it was a hedge against situations like this with the SEC.
Yeah.
So I get it is frustrating to see people on Twitter and just kind of almost not compute what that actually means and start using it as a justification for purchase or staying in the ecosystem. And it's like, you don't get it.
Yeah.
And there are those that do, but also still have a very bullish outlook on the ecosystem, as do I, because I do see again that the network effect of a positive environment, a network effect of jumping on the bandwagon or the coattails of a very strong narrative that's we're yet to see come to fruition in the way that this was designed for. That's the
Right.
biggest thing for me. And so I've seen it time and time again. It's not my first cycle. I was mining Bitcoin and Ethereum 2 cycles ago, like big warehouse security guards, the whole thing. And that's a whole other story. But I've seen this take place and how that negativity can spiral and from one day to the next change as we start seeing certain catalysts take place and certain situations be resolved in amicable ways at least. And we're going to see a turnaround where predictions are going to be reaching all-time highs again, and that whole narrative of decentralization is going to be a strong one this cycle, I hope, because if it isn't, then we've got a serious problem, because I think that people are going to be enslaved financially, which is not it's within the general populace best interest to be very relevant on what that decentralization can bring to their lives. And so if we miss that, then I mean we'll hit it on the next one probably, but we've got to find a way of staying around and staying trusted.
Yeah. Well, you know what? Okay. So this has been really helpful. I mean, and for folks that are reviewing this, I look at you, you got this traditional financial background. You're seeing the same things that I'm seeing in the marketplace. There is a lot of noise out there, but you're also saying, hey, pay attention to really kind of the timing where we actually are, which I really appreciate that. It's actually way more encouraging than discouraging. But also there's something here that I kind of bank on. Richard Hart is one of the originals, right? To me, he's kind of one of the original cypherpunk guys, and he can, he's what I would consider to be, one of the origin He's one of the guys at the very beginning. He has a lot of influence, whether he's on stream or not. And I think that I know a lot of very wealthy people prior to crypto who follow Richard Hart. And I know he can be, personality wise, he can, tick some people off. However, when things move, they move. And we've seen some unbelievable things happen during for hacks. I certainly saw those in real time. But also, I think that there's a go time. You know what I mean? Because we saw altcoin summer and the nature of the growth rate of hacks. It's almost like, the people that have seen this happen time and time again, and it's what I kind of reading between the lines from you, is it's not go time yet. And when it is go time, everyone moves together because it sucks in everything else, right? Because really the retailers are going to be on the back end of the green candles, because there's going to be a moment where you're like, okay, the rates, the money printer, the SEC, it's just not that time right now. And so what I kind of hear you saying is relax,
Everyone's
relax.
forgotten what a bull market is. I mean, it's
Yeah.
easy to get weighed down in a moment in a bubble because we've had so much sideways or downward trading in so many different tokens and ecosystems for a while now, that any ray of hope in terms of a pump in price seems to be encouraging people to prematurely project. And I've seen this again, and lots won't agree with me. I listened to a stream a little earlier on, or pieces of it, where everyone on the call was convinced we're in a bull cycle. And I think that's dangerous, especially for folks who are new, because we're preaching patience. And if they're seeing that we're in a bull cycle and things are not moving, yet they're still expected to be patient, how much sense does that make? Surely that's not and it's not accurate in my opinion, but it's also a bit irresponsible. So I think,
Yeah.
for me, you're absolutely right. We're not at that point yet. And as much as we can look at videos doing TA on the last couple of weeks and months, and we have a blueprint written for us that is very simple and digestible if you look for it and zoom out. And I
Yeah.
we have a tendency, a lot of people anyway, to overcomplicate how we analyze these things. If we break it down, we analyze the age even of our ecosystem, the all temporary, distractions and things aside, we're not there yet. We have the blueprint. Why are we trying to reinvent the wheel here? Because, as always, some things are telling us that, oh, the bull market could end a lot earlier, could start a lot earlier, could do this. It always revolves around the same schedule, regardless of a lot of these things. This isn't the first time a lot of these new, ideas as to why that will change have come out of the woodwork. There's always something. We have the added benefit from an early in perspective of inflation and dollar and fiat losing value and all of this stuff happening that's probably going to feed the beast a lot more. But I don't think we're anywhere close to where we're going to be this cycle. And I think it's dangerous to think otherwise, and it can shake you out. You can start thinking that we should already be starting to see. It would be great to see 100, 200,000 X's right now, but we're not there yet.
Yeah.
And look, and this isn't me beating my chest for anyone who's listening, but and anyone a part of the private group, for instance, who has a bit more of an indication as to where I'm attributing my funds. This is my biggest position, and I got in during the sacrifice phase, probably a lot more so than most, right? I'm not saying I'm a whale, but probably around the dolphin range, to be quite honest with you. And I haven't sold anything. And there's a reason for that. I don't consider myself a stupid person. I consider myself, pretty experienced within the investment realm, crypto also, right? And so I have enough faith to keep my own money in there. And that's because I see, if you use a little bit of foresight, you see the light at the end of the tunnel being really shiny. Yeah, it's going to take some things falling into place. And like you just listed earlier, there are a number of remediable roadblocks in place as to why we're not seeing that mass adoption right now. But I also see those things, coming to fruition rapidly after, a sentiment change. And I'm not saying we wait until the SEC situation is fully resolved, because, that may take a little while. We don't know. But I do think that there are a lot of other catalysts in place between now and then that are going to help fund
Yeah.
our, fund our unique selling points, let's say. And it's going to be a lot of legitimacy kind of brought in through other means.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I want to transition to kind of the future here, but last kind of commentary too is I think people need to remember, especially those who sacrificed other crypto is that the price point you got was pretty damn good. If you think about what the price was, and also, I think you're a good indicator to me of sensible, right? You've got experience, you're in this, and I like to help people, think in a more sensible way, right? Being
Being a hype
understanding it's
man helps no
yeah.
one, right? You've got
Yeah,
to,
yeah,
you've got
yeah,
to, and look, I was, even at the start of this, when Sacrifice going on some of the past performance, there was a certain amount of euphoria, and I
yeah,
legitimately thought we were going to come out the gates very strong. That didn't happen,
yeah,
but then adapting your thought process and evolving kind of your strategy a little bit, it shouldn't it shouldn't deteriorate your ambition. And
yeah,
yeah, and so I think that as we go into the next months and years, we're going to start seeing everyone kind of thinking along similar lines, and we're all going to be
yeah,
in bullish
yeah.
euphoria mode again.
Well, and what's so cool too is if you think about somebody that's just coming into it now, we tokenize communities, and these are all no coiners, right? These are people that literally are. This is their first entry into crypto. We go to communities of existing trust, and I'm kind of in some respects so thankful for the timing of this. That people do have a shot to get into Pulse and Pulse X at a very different rate. And if they see the things that others have seen in this, it's actually kind of a gift to have all of these factors playing in because it has shaken out all of the people that were weak, and there will be people who chase these things. But um, I really appreciate your perspective because one, it's encouraging to me, right? That smart people who are analyzing the same way I am, you have to be reminded at times, hey, we're going to make it. But also, I'm just reminded that Richard wants the glory, not the money, and he is a step ahead of folks, and I think this will be put behind us, and I think at just the right time, we're gonna see this thing open up because, like I said before, the prevailing wind is in our direction when it comes to, governments aren't becoming more friendly to crypto, and, decentralization is a threat, and it may be the only thing left standing. But I wanna ask you about kind of the future, right? Here you are a guy who's, you know, smart, you're invested, you've got businesses, all of these things. On Crypto Heartbeat, we tend to talk about really what really matters, why, right? Why, okay, let's say there's this future where regular people have an abundance, right? And that, with the onset of the future of, you know, AI, for example, and if you think about general intelligence and super intelligence, that there's a massive change potentially coming if you believe that those things will be possible, that we'll actually get AGI. We may have ASI like minutes later. That has the potential of really changing the very nature of work, of resourcing, of energy. When you think about your future, and you think about the future of money, and you think about where the world is at, what do you see?
That's an interesting question, and I think this can take a number of paths forward. The concerns I have are that abundance is going to be very subjective, so that we have a risk. We've talked, we've listened to people like Elon Musk, right, talking about a universal basic income, which is great in a communist country if that universal basic income is enough to function more so than the masses currently do. Look at China,
Yeah,
for instance. You travel between cities, everyone's in poverty. Now, I don't think that's necessarily going to be the case, but I think that as AI develops, we've already seen it. And this, again, run the risk of becoming a bit more of a conspiracy theorist, but looking again with a little bit more foresight at how these things tend to play out, we have a lot of white collar jobs that are currently being reduced to the very least, soon to be replaced.
yeah,
We have, Boston Dynamics and other companies of the like developing robots that are going to be able to replace workers in blue collar jobs as well. Now, how intricate they get in terms of mechanics or electricians or those types of folks, I think we're a little way off. But Amazon, you think they're not going to do away with their healthcare and do away with all of the political and general issues of employing mass population and replaced as soon as it's available
yeah,
and pliable enough to insert into their structure robots, right? And not just for lack of a better term, robots are kind of what we're looking at. And so on any kind of level, we're already seeing it take place now, certainly in terms of contract analyzing and all of that stuff that's reducing the workforce. Now, there's only one path that can take, really, and that is hedging toward that universal basic income, which means that, who knows how much time we have. This may not happen overnight. It does maybe give us some time to plan for this, or at least our kids to. But I think that part of my thinking is, firstly, getting out of cash as soon as it hits my account, right? If there's a way to put it into action that seems, a better than it sitting in your account and losing value, then do it, whether that be business, real estate, tangible assets, whatever it may be. You want something that isn't controllable. And, real estate's always been a good one because you're on the title for it. And so you own something that will have value in whatever that value is construed to be. But planning ahead, I mean, this all falls back to working your ass off now, even if that's getting, part-time jobs and putting it into assets you think will develop, because it's a finite amount of time before many jobs are replaced, before, the income and the revenue that's coming into folks is not necessarily at a point where it's guided by your expertise or your experience or your ability to create. It's pigeonholing a lot of people into that same category as your skills can be carried out less effectively and more efficiently by AI, by these other easily manageable and owned remedies. And so I think that one thing we need to bear in mind, however long this is going to come, and I know there's probably going to be people who are talking, thinking, wow, this guy's, got his Alex Jones hat on and he's, maybe going down some paths there, but you can't help but see this coming. And I think that, when you're on a ticking clock to accumulate enough assets or enough, value, net worth to set yourself up, you really need to make that happen. And so this, the world's aligning in certain ways right now, and crypto looks to be, at least temporarily during this cycle and a little bit further, in being in a position where if you play the game the right way, you're able to capitalize on it, right? And it's not going to take as much money as it typically has in other sectors, which is a bold thing to say, but when and this is again maybe a taboo thing to mention. I mentioned it in a previous video of mine too, but it's like leverage can be an important thing. If someone came to me, I've had friends of mine take out HELOCs, home equity lines of credit on their house to put into crypto, blue chips, right? As much as anything else, because common sense would dictate that you're going to get a 3 to 5x on that, more so than you would, versus, paying the loan on that, or versus, kind of just having that set in your account. And so, this is the world we live in. And so a lot of people have to be brave to a certain extent, I think, in terms of really looking to capitalize. I don't want to push anyone into making decisions that, put them in precarious situations. But for the majority of people out there, they're not going to have the funds to jump into buying assets and, and assigning their wealth in different areas. They need to make it first. Yep. And it's tough because, the end of that journey, if you're just working your 9 to 5, paying your bills, not thinking further ahead, then you're going to be shunted into that universal basic income category, however that takes form.
Well, you make a really good point. Here you are, someone that runs a PR firm, right? I ran an agency myself, and I think about, when all the EBITDA is calculated, and I look at it and I go, I could have just bought Ethereum. I could have not done this business, not employed these people, not done this, and made more money in Ethereum. And, it's kind of funny when you think about it, like if your timing is right, you make a really good point that, if I, had $1 million to invest and I put that in, a blue chip, comparatively to the business that might, literally make me bleed out my eyes for a year, I potentially would find better return in just sitting back and watching Ethereum move. Now, you got to get the timing right, but it's really interesting. And I think that I'm not the only person who's thinking that. And I think that, we haven't really seen, the changes in kind of the corporate function of putting this onto your balance sheet and it actually being,
we have at a very high level, but it hasn't replicated down to,
exactly. And that's the thing I think that we're going to see in this next cycle is that, to your point, there's going to be a lot more money coming in.
And we saw the Silicon Valley Bank situation really kind of put a steroid injection into that. A lot of very tech-savvy companies were storing their money in a bank in a traditional financial system that collapsed and they lost all their money, or a lot of it. Now they have the option. You see more and more banks doing this right now, being able to hold assets in these things, which is the first step. Now, obviously, crossing that threshold into companies and CEOs feeling comfortable enough to store their own value there. But I'm telling you, a lot of these Silicon Valley types are already doing that, and it's not
Yeah.
it's not again, it will take time to affect the masses and have that be a viable. Some people are only just now,
Yeah.
most in fact are only just now, if they are indeed understanding that crypto is not a fad, right?
Yeah.
Whatever form it takes, it's kind of the new way of doing things, right? And so,
Yeah.
it's going to be a journey for sure.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right. I think that it's a wise decision for sure
Yeah.
for any
Well,
company.
and I
You
think
see
about the
Elon
very
Musk started that,
yeah. Yeah.
last cycle, right? And people have certainly jumped on that bandwagon.
Well, I think of the practical stuff, right? The guy who owns a construction company or electrical supply or just somebody that's out there. I think about my own business. I have board meetings, I had investors, and if we were going to have 15 to 20% EBITDA, that was a good year.
Yeah,
That's a good year.
for sure.
I could have blown that out of the water with the cash sitting on the sidelines. It could have been in a 5x return, right? I could have literally killed expectations with just sitting on an appreciating asset. And I think that that's potentially what people are going to see this next go around. And that's why, rather than it just being more retail investors coming in, they will. But I think just a lot more average investment amounts increasing this cycle. What do you think?
Yes, I do think that for all of the reasons we've discussed in this, because I mean it's inevitable. It has to be inevitable. I will say that obviously, the number one roadblock that most are going to come up with is having the funds to put in,
Yeah.
right? Which is why I
Yeah.
keep going back to there's no getting around just working your ass off and do whatever you can, cutting back and creating that dry powder to invest.
Yeah.
I do think, and I'm on record saying this, I think, which again, some people don't agree with, but the more wealth someone accumulates, their wealth, I guess, isn't measured in how much money they have. It's more so measured in their ability to leverage higher rates, higher amounts at better rates, right?
Yeah.
And I think what we're going to see is the real utilization of leverage. And I'm not talking about necessarily within the crypto space, like a liquid loans. That'll have its place, but I think that folks are seeing a transition, let's say, of traditional leverage machines, again, HELOCs, mortgages, loans, business loans, those being utilized a lot more to
Yeah.
inject into the crypto space, which will be those bigger purchase amounts. Now, a lot of that is going to obviously, for the majority, flood into the blue chips. And so we're going to see that knock-on effect as people start exiting their positions after some of the gains there, and then going down and down and buying more of these altcoins, especially the more experienced heads. That's a natural progression. But yeah, I do think that we're at an intersection right now where I think we're going to see that crossover and synergy between investments only being made possible by leverage, which it sounds taboo, but that's how the world works, right? You want to buy a house, you don't have the cash for it, you borrow against it, or you
Yeah.
borrow, and you're leveraging your track record of income. Then you want to take out different loans, you're leveraging other assets. That's how businesses grow. Very rare does anyone have the cash injection unless you have, you're giving away shares from, investor input right away, or a seed round, or some angel investing. So for the average person out there, you have no real option if you want to make the big bucks than to
Yeah.
leverage
Yeah.
something. Now you've got to make
Yeah.
sure you're making an educated decision in terms of affording that leverage in a worst case scenario, which is easier said
Right.
than done. But everything's
Yep.
subjective to the situation you're currently in. You could always lose your job and your mortgage could be not paid. We saw that
Yeah.
happen in the big
Yeah.
housing crash. And so, yeah, I mean, I guess again, another roundabout way of answering kind of your question, but I do see those bigger purchases happening. And I think that is going to be one of the catalysts toward that as well.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. Ben Kayge, this has been fantastic. How do people get connected with you? You've got a massively growing channel. Your engagement is out, it's out of this world. I love your content. I love your perspective. To me, you are a leading indicator of what's good about this ecosystem. You really are. And so, one, I want to encourage you and say thank you for, putting in the time and the effort. I know you've got a number of things going on. How do people get a hold of you? And then tell us about your private group too.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, you can find me, Ben Kayge, on YouTube, pretty easy. Same on Twitter. I've been terrible at being consistent over the past couple of months, just because I've had some other things going on in the real world, all good things. But because this is far from a full-time gig for me, it's had to take a back seat. But Sub, I have a private group that's just now kind of kicking off, and I have some things planned for that in the coming weeks and months as well. That veers into obviously kind of what moves to make right now in terms of investing, which highly revolves around crypto, as you would imagine, given that it's probably definitely the best asset group right now to see some of the gains we want to see outside of the Richard Hart ecosystem as well. While it's my biggest position, it's not the only one, and it's not, where I'm focusing entirely. But then veering into, a lot of other stuff planning forward, tax situations, offshore banking, basically a lot of the stuff that needs to protect or we're going to need all the more in the coming months and years as things change on a macro level. And so really helping people navigate that in a way that doesn't require them to pay, $1,000, $2,000 entrance fee to learn the same stuff, right? It's a community. So feel free to inquire about that and join that too. And it's been great since I've been back in the saddle. It's been great seeing a bit of an insurgence of new subs and things coming in. So it's definitely motivating me to continue making content. Not just the once every 3 months I was doing before.
Well, I'm glad actually somebody that's got experience. I'm not a big fan of, private groups and those type of things in general, but that's because mostly it's talking heads who are they're more focused on entertainment, and they're trying to hustle you. And you've got a track record and experience. You've worked in this way, and also you've got a personal track record. So I'm excited to see you continue to grow. And I just love your voice in this space. So thanks for encouraging me and sharing with this community. So thank you very much for coming on, man. Yeah.
And thank you for having me. Yeah. Much the same to you too. I mean, we can keep blowing smoke at each other, but you've been doing some great things. And I love these conversations, by the way, that are a lot different to a lot of the other kind of streams you see out there that are all focused around almost the same stuff, just regurgitated in a different way. I think it's important to, get to know people and take a step back and look at the macro lens as well, because there are a lot of things affecting what our investment decisions should be. And I think that it's always dangerous to stay in a microcosm. And I think you're doing a great job of stepping outside of that. So thank you.
Wow. Thank you, man. I appreciate it. And folks, make sure you are subscribed to Ben Kayge, and, look forward to all your future content. Make sure you follow him on Twitter. And if you're interested in kind of digging in more in his private group, you can check that out on his Twitter and on all of his videos as well. Ben, thanks so much for joining.
Thank you. Appreciate it. See you guys.
Thanks, man. Wow. Once again, folks, a lot of this stuff I think about over the course of close to 600 videos and a bunch of interviews is having people like Ben. This is I got into this because I wanted, gray-haired guys, and I wanted to bring a perspective that I wasn't hearing. To have a guy that's been with BlackRock, he's been with Goldman Sachs, he's done it, right? And to have somebody like that giving perspective, he does not have to do this. It's clear, right? Runs a business, has a number of investments. Outside of that, he's a busy person. And I look at that and I go, I hear a sensibility, but also a been there, done that kind of thing. And so I really appreciate that, because to me, what I like about Ben is I don't feel like he's hustling me. Right. And I got a real big sensitivity to people that are hustling me. And I really feel like this is what defines this Pulse Chain Hexagon community is genuine people, right? Authentic people. And I always want to make sure we lift them up. And Ben is a perfect example of that. So folks, thanks for joining the Pulse today. Another interview in the books. Take care of yourself, folks, and do not mess with Texas. Take care, everybody.